Namaste to all the viewers and to General Bakshi for taking the time to appear on this show on Skype. He's in Delhi, I'm in Princeton, and we are going to do this. So, good evening to you. I guess it's morning here, but good evening to you, General Bakshi. How are you?
Thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah. So, today's topic is a very complicated topic, but so important, and that is about Pakistan. What to do about Pakistan, how to tame Pakistan. We seem to be sort of reacting to what they do, then we retaliate. So I want to, in the conversation, I want to get General Bakshi's perspective because he has so much experience and he's so clear in his articulation on how do you assess the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, and then we'll talk about the broader geopolitics, what happens when you consider China playing the role, what are India's options, should it just play defense, should it also go offense? So please give us your perspective.
You know, a little bit of background would be essential. You know, they say that, the problem in Kashmir is political. Our politicians are so fond of that, signature statement. And that, Kashmir is, so-called wanting azadi. The fact of the matter is, it is a rabidly communal conflict. In the late 1980s, Rajiv, the Jamaat-e-islami started an overt program of the communalization, Wahhabization, radicalization of the valley, so that it could be turned into one vast ghetto. In the 1990s, they formed the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. They got lots of weapons and training from Pakistan, and they tried an armed struggle. As part of this armed struggle, they carried out ethnic cleansing of 450,000 Kashmiri Pandits. You know, the same has been done in Serbia, and Slobodan Milosevic and others have faced the International Court of Justice and are behind bars. There are a number of Pakistani ISI directors need to be behind bars. But this is ethnic cleansing. So let's get the conflict, the nature of the conflict in clear perspective. Ghettos are coming up in Paris. Ghettos are coming up in Belgium. You know, does that mean tomorrow they should be Muslim states?
So, General, here I want to ask a follow-up question. The genocide, what you are saying, ethnic cleansing, on the scale like Bosnia and various other places. So, isn't it up to the Indian government to initiate the international crimes due process? Why would we depend on someone else to do it? It is up to the Indian government to document this and take it to the international courts and say these are crimes of a mass scale, and the ISI people should be found and put behind bars and so on. So, why is the Indian government not done anything?
Because, Rajiv, of a famous problem of denial. We have been in continual denial, and you have to be politically correct. It was not secular to say that it was a communal struggle. I mean, if you don't face up to the true nature of the struggle, you know how rabid propaganda in the mosques is used to stir up the youth. In the madrasas, they burn the schools, force the children to madrasas, brainwash them. And Wahhabism is, the kind of ideology it is. Maximalist, absolutely intolerant. And with that, you can, generate a riot anywhere in South Asia. So what you are seeing in Kashmir is a extended riot. Let's be very clear on that first. Extended communal riot.
So since this has been going on since the 1980s, so then we are talking about 30 years almost, is there documentation, actual factual documentation of this happening since the 1980s, and where we can point the fingers to ISI and ISI leaders such that a legal case could be made? Do you feel that it is solid documentation that we could take it to court?
Well, as far as the actual occurrence of this entire problem, the details of the ethnic cleansing, the houses that were burnt, the temples that were destroyed, the women that were raped, the people that were pulled out of their houses and shot, we have adequate amount of documentation. and the Kashmiri diaspora, which has been languishing in Jammu and Delhi, rotting in the heat for the last so many years, has adequate details. Linking it with the ISI per se to direct paper trails may be more difficult, but there is adequate evidence to know who backed them, who sent them, and we could certainly take a case. There were two things to it. Initially, the Indian government was very chary after our UN experience of involving any third party in such dispute. We now at long last have shed that hesitation with taking Kulbhushan Jadhav's case to the International Court of Justice, where our lawyers have done pretty well. We put Pakistan in the dock. And I do think at a point in time, this will need to be done to just set the record straight and to frame the struggle not as a freedom struggle, which Pakistan is trying to give it the contours of, but as a blatantly communal struggle involving near attempts at genocide and ethnic cleansing. That is the true nature of this struggle.
So one track, and there are maybe multiple parallel tracks. One track is the legal track to put them on the defensive legally and to get the upper hand in terms of public relations and world opinion by making allegations against them that they have been doing the thing on a bigger scale than Bosnia and so on, and this has been going on for 30 years. What beyond or in parallel with the legal can India do? What should we do militarily, or what else can we do to go after Pakistan on this matter?
I think excellent question, Rajiv. The fact of the matter is the real player in this whole drama is the Pakistan army, the deep state, Pakistan army ISI complex, which is using the democratic dispensation as just a facade. So anything that you do must address the Pakistani deep state. Unless you put pressure on the Pakistani military, the rest is all, in support, and I mean, they are just supportive measures. They are not the thing, and you are very right. I am afraid we have no option but to raise costs and consequences for the Pakistani military. Pakistan has become an international migraine. Ask the people of Afghanistan. They are sick and tired of the shenanigans of Pakistan. Ask the people of Iran. You know what happened there a few days back in the capital, Tehran. Who do you think is getting it all organized, orchestrated? Pakistan has once again rented out its territory for a campaign, a CIA Mukhabarat-led campaign to destabilize the nation state of Iran. The Pakistani former army chief, General Rahil Sharif, is now the General Nasimo of the Sunni combination led by Saudi Arabia of states which will perhaps refight the Karbala war. And they hope to win this fault line war with American pushing, with, a whole lot of people want a fault line war within Islam. And to that extent, that's not bad strategy. But the consequences for the region are going to be terrible.
So you
as
see,
long as Pakistan...
Yeah. So I think an important point that you are raising is that while the West's strategy to fight radical Islam is to divide the Sunni Shiite, let them fight, and there is merit in making that happen, but the way they are doing it is to unify the Sunnis, which means essentially unifying the Wahhabis or empowering the Wahhabis. So they are unifying the Sunnis against the Shiite Iran. So the idea is to attack Iran with the help of other Muslims, one group of Muslims against other group of Muslims. So in this process, Pakistan gets the upper hand, being mostly Sunni, even though there is large amount of Shiite. So do you feel that this global Islamic Sunni versus Shiite, where Sunnis are given the upper hand because of Israel being more concerned about Iran and United States backing that, do you feel that this Western backing of Sunni against Shiite actually is the reason why they cannot just go after Pakistan and finish them off because it's a Sunni state?
That is precisely the point. In his campaign train rhetoric, President Donald Trump had often mentioned of the terror, network, and how he would take energetic, steps to destroy what he called Islamic terrorism. But however, in actual practice, what we have seen is that one of the first major foreign visits is to Saudi Arabia, which is the source of Wahhabism, which is the source of all the ideological support to terrorist activities all around the globe. The Iranian terrorism is, if you can call it that, is more focused on, the Hezbollah, is more focused towards Iran, is more focused towards gaining influence in the Middle East. They are not global on the scale that the Saudi-backed terrorism is. Who did 9/11? The Saudis. And today they are being rewarded.
Right. So this is a point. So to understand Pakistan, we got to understand global Islam. And to understand global Islam, we cannot avoid the top issue of Sunni versus Shiite and the Wahhabi headquarters, the Wahhabi brain of the Sunni movement today in the Saudi hands. And therefore, when you look at it in that way, we have to take to task both Israel and United States, because in the Sunni versus Shiite fight, they are supporting the Sunnis far too much and consolidating the Sunnis and hence consolidating the Wahhabis. And Al-Qaeda is a Sunni movement. ISIS is a Sunni movement.
Absolutely.
ISIS is a Sunni movement. So Pakistan is an extension of that. So they are doing all of this because they hate Iran far too much, and they're willing to pay whatever price in order to defeat Iran. So I think we have to put this topic also on the table.
Absolutely. Please see what is happening in the United Kingdom. Please see what is happening in Europe. They built up the IS to dethrone Bashar al-Assad. And what has happened? Look at the blowback. This is just the start of the blowback. You see? So, when you know the consequences, Einstein said very rightly, madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We've seen what has happened by supporting, for short-term tactical gains, Sunni extremism. You did it in Afghanistan. The Mujahideen, the jihadi, was once the favorite of the CIA and the United States, and the Saudi Mukhabarat laid out the money, the dollars on the table. And what Pakistan is paying the consequences for that. Afghanistan, that poor nation state, has been destroyed virtually. Now they are trying to do it to Iran, and Pakistan has once again lent its territory for the destabilization of all its neighbors. How it affects us is that, once Pakistan becomes a part of the CIA Mukhabarat project, then pressure is put on India not to retaliate. After 26/11, quite obviously the Indian government was mulling some kind of retaliation. Well, that is the time pressure was put, they are fighting our war in Afghanistan, and therefore leave them alone and we will tackle them. They did nothing to tackle them. What in effect it means to us is, look, Indian lives are not important. We couldn't care less how many Indian soldiers, citizens are killed by the Pakistani jihad against you. I mean, it doesn't suit us for you to take action against Pakistan. Now, I'm afraid the last Indian government, went entirely along. It gave primacy to American interests over Indian national interests. I am certain that the things will have to be different this time. India is not a small state. It is not a banana republic. We will push back. We will push back, and there will be consequences for Pakistan.
Yeah. So are you suggesting that a key device in India's hands is to utilize Iran? Because Iran is the target of the same people that we are. Are you suggesting a closer alliance with Iran in dealing with this problem?
Look, Rajiv, in pure Kautilyan terms, an enemy's enemy is my friend. Period.
Right.
An enemy's enemy is my friend. Why can't Indian diplomacy now work towards creating a convergence of India, Iran, Pakistan, the nations that are sick and tired of Pakistan's meddling, Pakistani shenanigans? The Iranian army chief of staff told Pakistan that we will hit back at the bases that you've got, and there's already mortar fire being exchanged on the Iranian border, there's artillery fire being exchanged on the Indian border, and there's small arms fire being exchanged on Afghan border. Pakistan is a sick state.
So what you are saying is Iran, Afghanistan and India have a common interest in this?
Absolutely.
So,
and how far will the Russians go in accepting the destabilization of Iran? How far will the Chinese accept the destabilization of a nation state of Iran.
Yeah.
So
So
that
why?
extent, you,
So in
you
so in that so in that case, what I don't understand is why is Iran sometimes also supporting Pakistan? In various ways, they sometimes are. When so much is happening to them from Pakistan against them, why are they still supporting Pakistan in many cases?
look, I think they are supporting in the hope that they will be able to, wean Pakistan away from this Sunni axis which is emerging. But I'm afraid Pakistan is too far gone down the route. The very appointment of Rahil Sharif as the General Nassimo of the Sunni states for the next Karbala war against Iran, that's not gone down too well with the Iranians. The kind of, one of the top American covert action experts, Michael, he's the chap who led the hunt for Osama bin Laden. He's now placed in charge of covert operations against Iran. These are happening from the side of Saudi Arabia, from Iraq side, and from Pakistan side into the Baluch component of Iran, Sistan, Baluchistan. Pakistan is playing a major role. Once again, it has lent out its territory, sold out its territory for any, destabilization attempts of its neighbors. How long should the neighbors accept it quietly? I mean, I would also like to know that.
So isn't there also a problem that Pakistan has both Sunni Shiite within, like
That's right.
Iraq did, and don't want to destabilize that. And Afghanistan also has both Shiite and Sunni. So for them to play too close to Iran has domestic ramifications in creating a rift domestically between the Shiite and Sunni. And do you think that the time has come to actually create that rift?
Well, that rift is already there. As you are aware, Rajiv, Shias are being pulled out of the buses and shot in Pakistan. This has been going on for quite some time. And now I think Pakistan has under Saudi pressure because it is a state beholden. I mean, it is a beggar state. So therefore, it is a rentier state. So it is dependent now on Chinese money and it is dependent on Saudi finances. What remains to be seen is how happy will the Chinese be with the threats coming to their China-Pakistan economic corridor, now virtually from all three sides, from Afghanistan, from India, from Iran. I mean, are they happy with that situation? Two Chinese, language teachers were killed in Pakistan, in Baluchistan lately. And you know that Xi Jinping gave a cold shoulder to Nawaz Sharif. Nawaz Sharif, when he went to Saudi Arabia for Trump's visit, was not even allowed to speak. I mean, that state is reaching pathetic level, trying to, make itself the handmaiden of all destabilization attempts in the neighborhood, renting out its territory. This state has become a regional migraine. And its isolation could not be more marked.
Yeah. So, one of the trump cards or one of the strategies India has is also to play this Baluchistan card. Because the Baluchi separatist movement have always been asking for help from India, and there are sometimes verbal attempts, verbal support, moral support, a speech here and there. But what they are looking for is a concerted, on the ground action, and India needs to do that. So, what are your thoughts on that? And then, what do you think of the fact that Baluchis are Sunnis? So, that is also, so that's a problem with respect to Iran also. Otherwise, Iran could have helped.
That's the point. That is what Pakistan is using against the Sunnis in Baluchistan. I mean, they are funding that covert action by the Saudi mukhabarat, by the CIA. They once again made themselves very willing tools. But the fact is that the Sunni Baluchis themselves, the clash is between the nationalists and the jihadists amongst the Baluch. And there is a strong nationalist sentiment amongst the Baluch. They were an independent state, at 47. They were a state on par with Nepal. And it is the machinations of Mr. Jinnah who, got them to firstly accede under military pressure, and the Baluchis have never accepted it. So if Pakistan can meddle around in Jammu and Kashmir, I think then India, beyond a point in time, beyond a level of threshold of tolerance, is justified in hitting back in Baluchistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, in Sindh, with the Muhajirs, with the Shias and with every possible fault line in Pakistan. Two can play the game, and we do not see why this should be a one-way traffic all along, and for how long.
Okay. Okay, so is the Indian calculation of the the national security people and other people, are they reluctant to do this because they feel that there are sleeper cells in India, being a large Muslim population, that if we were to do this, they will also create domestic havoc and things will fall out of control everywhere? That all of South Asia will become like one big war like in the Middle East. How secure is India vis-a-vis its own Muslim population to be able to take this tough stand against Pakistan and say, okay, we're going to instigate internal violence within Pakistan?
Rajiv, Pakistan has done its worst. I don't think it could do anything more. And if it is not done anything more, it is because of lack of capacity to escalate beyond a point in the internal conflict within India. You see, they are trying every fault line. They are trying even to support the Maoists now. They tried to support the Northeast insurgents. The ISI has not been wanting in terms of provocation. The point is, how long do you take that provocation lying down? How long do you fight reactively? How long do you stick to the Indian historical context that every battle for Panipat must be fought deep within India? Decisive battles cannot be reactive and defensive and fought on your own soil. You have to externalize the conflict. Otherwise, we will suffer. The time has come now for us to give a clear signal to the United States. India is the third largest economy in the world. We don't think we are pushovers. And I don't think it would do to treat India as a pushover and push it beyond a point. We have our national interests. And if our friends are not sensitive to our national interests, then I'm afraid we will have to proceed whether it hurts their national interests or otherwise. We have to protect ours. For far too long, we have been very supportive of the Americans in the hope that, they would be able to restrain Pakistan. That's just not happened. That's just not happened.
Yeah, I'll come to Americans because I think we have a lot to discuss on the US side of it, but I'll come to that in a moment. But sticking to India, Pakistan, continuing that line of thinking, I think we are in agreement that ISI is doing whatever harm it can do. Possibly, they are already at full capacity against India. So if we instigate them, provoke them, it's not going to get any worse because they are doing whatever they can do anyway. So the advantage, there is no harm in instigating them further and being proactive and aggressive. The benefit of doing it is that it will keep them busy domestically. If we start instigating fights in Baluchistan, Sindh and various places, their capacity has to be redirected towards defending their own territory. And so if anything, it will actually help us, give us some relief for maybe a decade or two, and we can become stronger during that time. So what one strategy could be instigate, put oil on the fires within Pakistan to keep those guys busy, and they have less interest and less capacity to externalize their problems to the neighboring countries. Is that a viable strategy?
That's a very viable strategy. That's a very viable strategy. Attack is the best form of defense. That is a age-old military truism. You cannot keep defending. You cannot be reactive and confined to consequence management in your own territory. You have to hit out. And unless you hit out, you will suffer. Your population will suffer. We cannot bleed indefinitely. We cannot subject ourselves to the wars of 1,000 cuts. It's now time to impose them back. But Rajiv, what I would like to point out is very, very clearly that we have to have a military component to this dissuasive strategy. A purely an internalized conflict within Pakistan will just preoccupy the Pakistan army but not hurt it beyond a point. So therefore, the Pakistan army also has to be hit and hit hard.
So let's talk about a non-nuclear military option. What is such a thing? If you were commanding a non-nuclear warfare against Pakistan, which involves the Indian military, what are the kind of things you could do?
That is the precise point. I'm very glad we've come to it. What we have been trying to tell Pakistan is that there is space for a limited war between the spectral ends of nuclear and sub-conventional conflict, between an all-out spasmodic nuclear exchange and sub-conventional conflict, there is space for a limited war. Kargil was fought for 3 months. How many nukes did you see landing on New Delhi? Not one. So, Pakistan has been allowed to get away with this blackmail for too long. We have self-deterred ourselves into impotence by, accepting the Pakistani thesis that one soldier crosses the line of control or the international border and pop goes the weasel, nuclear bombs will start, falling either side. Therefore, don't even think of responding militarily to Jammu and Kashmir. For 30 years, we have been suckered into this. Also, we were suckered into this because of a lack of military capacity. Once the Soviet Union went down the tube, our source of subsidized weapons evaporated. We were in serious problem for 2 decades. Our own economy was close to collapse in 1990. Don't forget. Now the Indian economy is picked up. Frankly, by the first decade of the last century, our remilitarization process should have started. Unfortunately, the UPA delayed that inordinately for whatever reasons, and most of the reasons were filthy lucrative. So we have a lot of catching up to do. And let me tell you that this inexorable Indian military build-up, which will be conventional military build-up, which will be fueled by the exponential rise in the Indian economy, is going to create the windows of opportunity where we can press home clear conventional advantages to teach Pakistan a lesson in good manners as to how exactly it should behave.
Okay, so if India, Pakistan were isolated from the rest of the world, there was no United States, Russia, China, none of that, then this could be certainly a good option to have a limited conventional war and hit them hard. Even there, even before we talk about the other countries coming in, which I want to introduce in a moment, but even if this were an ideal kind of a situation where other countries are not involved, it's just 2 countries fighting it out, how far can we go before, out of panic, Pakistan pushes the nuclear button? Because they will say our nation is now devastated anyway. If I'm going to be killed, I might as well kill my enemy before I die. That suicide bomber is part of this Islamic stupid mentality. It is there. I mean, it doesn't take too much to turn one of those radical thinkers into a suicide bomber. So you could also have a suicide state, a state which says we as a nation go to commit suicide because some Allah or something will look after us. How far do you think, forgetting the interventions of other countries, which I want to discuss later, but even in a bilateral situation, how far do you think we can push before they will press that button?
Rajiv, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm glad you asked that question because of the simple fact, fortunately for us and for the world, the nuclear button is not in the hands of the suicide bomber. It is in the hands of Pakistani 4 and 4-star generals who live in palatial bungalows with Mercedes cars, retinues of butlers and servants and batmen. And let me assure you, such a person will not press the nuclear button. It means the evaporation of his bungalow, his wife, trophy wife, and his family, and all the perks that he enjoys. Let's be quite clear. The Pakistani military are rational actors. We have dealt with them before. We have pushed them to the level it took to break half their country. And God help us, we can do it again. In 2003, very few people know, an artillery war started across the line of control. We used our medium and heavy artillery to punish Pakistan. Few months of this, Pakistanis cried uncle, and they asked for a ceasefire, which held, Rajiv, from 2003 to 2013. We know their pain points. We know their thresholds of tolerance. We will push them till there. And let me tell you, this has been war game, this has been worked out, and if people think it can't be done, they're in for a surprise. They're in for a surprise. And let me go a step further. Second World War, Hitler, can you think of a greater psychopath? I mean, he killed 6 million Jews. He had biological and chemical warfare weapons. The war was fought till the Wolfschanze, the Führer bunker in Berlin. Did you see a single chemical or biological warfare weapon being used by Nazi Germany? There was a deterrence, there was a face-off. That same thing can operate, don't forget. And the danger would come if the nuclear weapons fall into the hands of non-state actors. Then the Americans also need to worry, because they will be one of the first targets. The Israelis need to worry. And the whole lot of world will have to gang up to see that we defang this snake.
Yeah. So now when we talk about Americans, their concern is Pakistan state crumbling, because Pakistan state, as you have evaluated, so have the Americans, it's a rational actor. They may be bad guys, but they are rational. They are not going to commit, they are not suicide bombers. So you can have a rational war with them and they'll give a rational response. But if that state were to crumble and the terrorists were to take over, then the nukes get into the terrorist hands and even the Americans are in trouble and Israel and everybody is worried. So this is why the Americans will put pressure on India not to destabilize the state. So do you feel that is true? And what can India do in a negotiation with United States to say we need to go after the Pakistani state without collapsing the state but beating them up to a point?
That is the point. You see, nobody has asked for an all-out war to put the Indian flag on Islamabad. We have not asked for that. We are talking for a limited war which hurts the Pakistani army enough to know that if they allow it to proceed any further, the consequences for their existence would be imperiled. I mean, their very existence would be imperiled. What we would want to tell our American friends is that they need to pressurize this state. I'm afraid they are not taking our national security concerns seriously enough. They are not taking Indian national security concerns seriously enough for the simple reason that if Indians are not serious enough, why should the Americans be? Why should they pull our chestnuts out of the fire? So if India decides, summons up the political will, enough is enough. This will have to be called a halt to. We know how far to go. We know how far to push the Pakistanis till they cry uncle. And that uncle would be Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam will then have to intervene to rein in the Pakistani state adventurism.
Yeah. So do you feel that another breakup of Pakistan by removing Baluchistan is pushing them beyond the threshold, or do you think that they will still they'll still want to keep the Pakistani state as rational actors?
Well, that would be the intention. But the fact of the matter is that even the Americans have now to think hard. The global scenario is changing so rapidly that it is almost akin to what Alvin Toffler said, future shock. Did you imagine that the Chinese Navy would have an outlet on the Arabian Sea? The Pakistanis have just given them that. You think the United States is delighted? And if they are, well, they have been short-sighted. China is a far greater threat to them than the Russians ever will be. China is the bigger economy, the bigger power, with the greater staying power. And if you allow it to come into the Indian Ocean, they've got a base at Gwadar, courtesy Pakistan. They've gotten a base at Djibouti. They've purchased that base. They are in the Indian Ocean players. You know, the British fought that so-called, they played the game, the great game in Central Asia and Afghanistan to prevent the Russians from reaching the warm waters of the Arabian Sea. In one fell stroke, China is on the Arabian Sea.
Yeah. So
are the Americans going to be blind to this?
So what Pakistan has to offer as a state that is renting itself to this one, that one, what they have to offer, which is unique, is geography. Their geography is what it takes for Russia, China to access the warm waters. And so they've managed a negotiation with China very brilliantly to give them this access, and now I think they're also negotiating with Russia, and Putin is warming up to them. What do you think of Russia? Because Russia cannot reach the warm water through, even if they got Afghanistan, even if they had won the war in Afghanistan, it doesn't get them to the Indian Ocean. They still have Iran on one side and they have Pakistan on the other side. So Russia has to have Pakistan in order to have access, and with this China highways going from China, Tibet, Central Asia, Russia can negotiate that they'll connect into that. They'll connect into the CPEC and they'll also join CPEC. So India should worry about it, and what do you think are the prospects that is what Pakistan is trying to sell to them?
So if both Russia and China is going to get access to the naval base at Gwadar, should that make the Americans delighted? Would they not like to see Baluchistan as an independent entity then, and in the hands of somebody else who is not going to give access to China and Pakistan? I'm afraid America's enemy cannot be, petty states and small time states like Iran. I mean, a great country needs great enemies. So if you are not going to tackle the Russians and the Chinese and busy yourself in small time wars with two tyrants like North Korea or possibly Iran, the axis of evil as it was called, I think that is pathetic for American grand strategy. They are being short-sighted. Their problem is this tactical agenda. It's amazing that they are not looking at the grand picture. The pivot to Asia has been a damn squib.
But that is unfortunately the reality in USA, and unfortunately the reality with the new government, because they have other issues, other agendas, other things, other priorities. So China is really taking great advantage of this. And while Trump said his purpose is to make America great again, actually what he's doing is making China great again. That is what is ending up happening. Yeah, and Russia may realize that they are better off aligned with China. They have good relations now. Why not? Why fight with Pakistan if geographically Pakistan is what gives them access? If they align with Russia, say we'll also join the CPEC and give us a ride all the way to the Indian Ocean, they will have access for trade, for military, for whatever. Now the question is, to what extent do we wait till United States gets its act together? It has not got its act together on Pakistan for the last 50 years, 60 years. It has not. Almost always when it's about to give up on Pakistan and just go after them, the Pakistanis pull some trick. And Indian diplomacy and Indian foreign policy have not been able to anticipate how cunning and how effective Pakistanis are in Washington. And I will tell you, in Washington, Pakistan, with all the problems, they know how to wheel and deal. They know how to do things under the table. They know how to work out with the military generals. They know how to work out with some business tycoon who's a big politician, how to get some deals for them. Chinese know how to do that. Pakistanis know how to do that. And this is the kind of diplomacy I am not sure India has been able to counter. Indian diplomacy, Indian foreign policy, Indian national security, I am not convinced is able to counter all these different things that Pakistan and China are able to do now.
I tend to agree with you to a very large extent. The simple point is there are strong lobbies within the Pentagon. The Central Army, the Central Command chiefs have all dealt with Pakistan extensively, and there is a strong pro-Pakistan lobby in the Pentagon. Now the problem and the good news for us, Rajiv, is the Pakistanis are too clever by half. If they had aligned themselves entirely to the Chinese camp and said, we have burnt our bridges with the United States, that would be fine, because then they would be proceeding and the Russians would also possibly join up with them, because the Americans are pushing them in that direction. Whereas I thought the initial glimmerings of strategy that came out during the campaign rhetoric with the Trump camp was trying to make overtures towards Russia to break the Russia-China alliance. Made a lot of tactical sense, lot of strategic sense. But what we have seen is that the deep state in the United States, pushing back against any opening towards Russia. And there are lots of senior officials who are now in trouble in the United States for their outreach to Russia, to try to split the Chinese-Russian alliance, which is a great danger. The Chinese just lack technology which the Russians can give them. Excellent weapons technology, and China will be more than a match tomorrow. So the point at issue is the Pakistanis are too clever by half. If they had aligned with the Chinese only, they have now made outreaches again to the United States. Even as they align with China, even as they take $51 billion, they are trying to succor the Chinese by doing the Baluchistan Act for the CIA and the Saudi mukhabarat. And I think at a point in time, Pakistan may just end up having, created a situation where every interlocutor combines to give it a kick. I don't put it beyond them. They are
But
too
you
clever
see,
by half.
but you see, the only thing they have going, which is valuable to all of these people, is geography. I mean, they have a geographical location, and as they say in real estate, location, location, location. That is what matters. They have access between the Central Asia and the warm water south. That access they can sell. They can market, the rights to that country, and that's what they got, and they are brilliantly negotiating that. So the state, a rational state, this is something the terrorists would not think, they are not smart enough to think, but the rational part of the Pakistani state is playing this game, and they are playing it skillfully. You could also say that they are very skillful in keeping all opponents working with them, even though they are fighting each other. That whether there is US-China rivalry, whether there is US-Russia rivalry, they are the true non-aligned. They are the true multi-aligned. So we, in fact, India is left without true friends. Who is the all-weather friend for India? So this takes me to the next point. What do you think India has to do in its relationship with China? I mean, now let's shift the focus to China, because we tried something, they did not reciprocate, they are not interested in settling the border. They are doing lip service, they'll help us with the UN Security Council, but then they say no. When there is a known terrorist group, Islamic terrorist group, everybody else is willing to blacklist them. China puts their foot down and blocks it. So they are double-faced. They are not straight people. So what do you think India should do, considering that they're very powerful? What are the weapons India has? Both positive, carrots and sticks.
Excellent. Before I switch to China, just one last word on Pakistan. Their advantage is geography. Your task should be to change that geography. I leave it at that.
Absolutely. Yes, and that requires Balochistan action.
And that requires some concerted strategic thinking and action with a well, designed long-term blueprint. And
right.
If India summons up the political will, it can and should be done. So that's one. Coming now to the Chinese dragon. The elephant in the room is China. The fact of the matter is that China has, by the very fact that Xi Jinping went to Pakistan and he decided to back the China-Pakistan economic corridor, put his money where his mouth is, and invest $51 billion in Pakistan. The previous Chinese regimes had hesitated. They were not sure how stable is this state, and how rational is this state actor. But Xi Jinping made that commitment. Now, having made that commitment, quite obviously, he has managed to get India's back up. India is now pushing back. Unlike the India of a decade back, where the main thing was don't annoy the Chinese, don't annoy the Chinese, I think the present political dispensation is quite clear. India can and will push back. And it is not a walkover for China. They may have a defense budget which is $150 billion to our $40 billion. But the fact is that their commitments are far too many. And India has just done the right thing. We can play a tit-for-tat strategy. If China backs Pakistan, India needs to reach out heavily to Japan, to Vietnam, to South Korea, to Taiwan if required, to the Philippines, to Indonesia, to all states that feel threatened by the rise of an increasingly aggressive China. We have the cards that we can play. And if beyond a point there is a Tibet card, China, that's a great vulnerability. They have not been able to assimilate that region. And if push comes to shove, and if China will support, non-state actors in Pakistan like this Jaish-e-Mohammed Supremo, then I'm afraid India is justified in trying to escalate and give a tit-for-tat response.
But let's look at the practical. Let's look from ideology to practicalities. Practicality-wise, China's ability to use Pakistan against India is huge. India's ability to use Tibet is not so huge because it's a small population. They're not militarized. They're not terrorists. We don't have the same physical presence in Tibet. We have a small community of monks and Buddhists in Dharamsala and various places. So our ability to hit back with force, physical force, is not all that great. What would you say to that?
You see, my allusion was more to what you can do in a quasi-alliance with Japan. with South
Okay.
Korea. There are huge navies, and the Chinese are looking seawards now. Don't forget that their entire economic miracle is on the coastal belt. Their greatest vulnerability is along the Chinese coastline. Their special economic zones, Shanghai, Guangdong, etc., are their core areas now, which are, they cannot trade space for time there. Therefore, the naval aspect of their defense is becoming increasingly important. Here, India is increasingly becoming a strong naval power, and in alliance structures in alliance relationships or quasi-alliance relationships with countries like Japan, with countries like South Korea, with Taiwan. India is in a position to push back. Tibet by itself will not, worry the Chinese. We don't want that the CIA revolt, the brutality with which it was crushed, to be repeated. They just sold the Tibetans out. The importance of Tibet stems from a correlation with a military clash between the two countries. A Tibet up in flames with a border war taking place is quite a different scenario than just a Tibet which is put on fire for a brief amount of time and they clamp down very hard. No, that won't work. Anything to do with Tibet has to be in correlation to a physical, limited conflict between the two countries. There, the Tibetan guerrillas have a tremendous amount of leverage that they provide us in correlation with the conflict. And the two can be made to coincide.
So just like on the western side of India, there is this Pakistan corridor that China is using. Similarly, Myanmar is on the eastern side, another corridor. So why isn't, now that is not as strong a state as Pakistan, that is not as vulnerable to breakdown and terrorism and whatnot. Why hasn't India completely brought Myanmar on board to the exclusion of the Chinese access through their country? That is something that ought to have taken our last 20 years diplomacy. We should have done that.
I think we are now moving towards that. You would realize that there are a number of groupings, BIMSTEC and the others, which have been taken up as more or less a counterweight to the CEPC, to the China-Pakistan economic corridor. There are alternative corridors that come from Myanmar to Bangladesh to the sea, Myanmar to the sea and Myanmar to Bangladesh and further on, through our ports to Africa. Why not? We are proposing alternative corridors because unfortunately the China-Pakistan economic corridor has huge strategic military connotations in terms of the ability to bring mechanized forces into an India-Pakistan war. China can bring its mechanized forces, number one. And number two is it is built through our sovereign territory. It is built through Gilgit-Baltistan, which belongs to us. So we can't think of ever acceding to the China-Pakistan economic corridor. But as a big power, India can propose alternatives.
So also in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, there's a very thin piece of land which is Pakistan-occupied, through which the China corridor goes.
That's right.
What is the viability of blockading that now? Because it is our territory. Legally, we should do that. Through our territory, all these things are happening. Why couldn't we go and do something there militarily?
That is what even the Chinese are getting worried about. You may have sunk $51 billion, but the fact is, you have sunk it in an enterprise which can be vulnerable from many directions, a number of directions. That is why the Chinese asked the Pakistanis first to raise 2 divisions to protect this corridor. Now they are raising their own because they don't trust the Pakistanis. We just had 2 Chinese scholars killed there in Balochistan.
But with China raising 2 divisions and Pakistan raising 2 divisions, those are 4 divisions against India. That is what they're trying to would end up doing. So before all that happens, if you are talking about limited conventional war, why not do it over there? Why not raise the price for China to participate so that they'll have to raise the stakes beyond 51 if they want to continue, 51 billion, because they will realize that this is something easy India can do and will do, has the capacity to do, has the will to do. So India needs to demonstrate its actions in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir in a very targeted geography, which is a geography through which this CPEC goes.
May I give you a very interesting historical parallel? In the First World War, the Turks had built the Hijaz railway right up to Saudi Arabia via Iraq, Syria, etc. You know, the Lawrence of Arabia, he came up with a strategy: don't cut this line. Keep pinpricks on this line, raise the cost of running this line so high that they can either not leave it nor can they abandon it. I think the Chinese have put themselves with a communication artery that runs parallel to the Indian frontier. I say that again.
Yes. Yes.
It runs parallel to the Indian frontier, and to that extent,
So,
it is vulnerable throughout its length.
yeah, but you know the thing is
Vulnerability needs to be driven home.
about 200 kilometers they built tunnels to make it less vulnerable. Chinese have the engineering unparalleled anywhere in the world to do this kind of civil engineering. They have built 200 kilometers of tunnels. They've given the loans and whatnot and given the financial aid to Pakistan and provided the engineering. So under the mountains of Kashmir, they have got 200 kilometers underground. So this CPEC, large part of it where it's vulnerable is underground. But still there are remedies. For a cost, there is, for some price, you can dig through those tunnels, you can do a lot of things. If India wants to raise the ante, that the cost of operating CPEC is going to be much more, it's not some peaceful region, then it is India who has to create some kind of Gadar, has to create some kind of insurrection, either conventional warfare or internal uprising or whatever. Why isn't India able to generate POC, inside POC, a kind of uprising to do these things?
Look, I mean, there are very viable propositions there in terms of the fact that the population of Gilgit-Baltistan is Shia. And they have been subjected to the most vicious programs of late. They are the people most disaffected and dissatisfied. So that is one vulnerability which is straight away there, which we can exploit. The second is, tunnels may be secure, you know, but mountain passes and bridges, all that you need is a retarder penetration bomb by your Air Force. Half the hillside can be brought down on that mountain road. One bridge gone. One bridge gone. Critical industry.
Yeah, and while this construction is still going on of this big huge highway with rails and roads and pipelines and all that, this is a time every few months we should blast something, because it will create a certain psychological effect and raise the cost of doing business there.
I would preparations that you have to make to be ready for the escalation consequences. You don't push in a vacuum. You prepare and then you push. I think that would be enough for the time being.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to something now. Now Modi is going to visit US and meet Trump. So what do you think of that meeting? Considering that there is volatility on the Trump side, he's unpredictable. You don't until the eve of a summit with China or with anybody. The public statements don't really mean anything. What transpires behind closed doors is a complete. There's some kind of mysterious process that determines the outcome, and whatever the Indians may be thinking and whatever the people in Washington, the Indians are reading, may not be true at all about what may actually happen. So, given this level of uncertainty and so many moving parts, what do you think? How do you think Modi? What do you think of Modi's visit? What should he do, and what are the risks also?
Look, Rajiv, the simple fact is that when we heard Donald Trump's, campaign rhetoric, there was a lot of enthusiasm in certain parts in India. He had called Pakistan the most dangerous state on the earth. In one rally, he had even said that the best thing is to let India deal with Pakistan. So all that, let me be very honest, had led to a lot of enthusiasm coming up in India, and the Hindu, had voted for Donald Trump. I mean, let's not forget that. But the fact of the matter is, we have been quite surprised thereafter. What we expected is not the way it has been turning out so far. But let me also say, historically, even Obama had started with a pro-China tilt, and we thought we had been left out in the cold. But there are certain geopolitical realities the Americans can't ignore. If at any time they have to get tough with China or try and stop China's expansionism, well, they need India. Let's be very clear about that fact. You cannot take China without the only counterweight to China in the whole of Asia is India, possibly in combination with Japan. So I think at a point in time, we have found that commonality of values has meant very little. Liberty,
Yes.
fraternity, equality, we always
All
shared.
this.
But we found
Yes.
all the military goodies going to Pakistan and to all
Right.
the military dictators and tyrannical regimes in the region. But
Right.
we find that a congruence of national interest in pure geostrategic terms is a far more stable, basis for formulating relationships. The second thing is, we are entering a phase of multipolarity. I'm afraid America, despite all the desires to make it great again, the recent actions have made it slip down in the Committee of Nations. Leadership is heading towards China, towards Europe, and we are heading for a truly multipolar situation. A multipolar situation, these existed before World War I and World War II, and these, Rajiv, were characterized by rapid alignments and realignments. At the start of the war, Russia-German pact, Ribbentrop-Molotov pact, and then Germany invades Russia. They fight a life and death struggle. So there have been total paradigm shifts and rapid changes that will take place in a multipolar configuration. We should be ready for that.
So we need we need leaders who can think on their feet. We need to be opportunistic. We need to be able to reconfigure, re-optimize very rapidly. And our civil service, is the foreign service, is the national security leadership today up to that, where you really need to have your facts right, you need to be very swift in negotiation, be able to play many cards, negotiate on many tables at the same time. Do you think our leadership is trained to do that efficiently? Or do you think that they will play it too safe?
Bangladesh showed that when we get our act together, we can do one hell of a lot. We had after independence a pacific culture, soft power-oriented culture, and when General Sir Roy Butcher went to salute his boss Nehru, and he presented plans for the modernization and expansion of the army, he was told by Nehru, "General, we don't need an army. The police will do." And the look of shock on General Roy Butcher's face needs to be framed. Fortunately, the shock of 62, thank the Chinese for that. They woke us to realism and reality. And thereafter, 65 war, 71 war, you found a whole political leadership, you found a military, political, police, bureaucracy that thought in realist terms, that thought in, pure action terms, hard power terms. And the results were visible on the battlefield of 1971. That shows you what India can do if it gets its act together. We have the brain power. We have the will. We have the potential. We are the youngest country in the world. We can field the largest armed forces more than China, double China's today. Don't forget that. We have inherent strength. Realize those strengths and act like a big boy now. You are in that big boy league. Don't act diffident and like a lamb amongst lions. You are a lion. You have to look into that river. Look at that river. We don't need the United States. We don't need anybody else. If India decides, it can do on its own. 71 war, the Americans had sent the 7th fleet against us. Did that stop us from breaking Bangladesh in two? Maybe it just saved what was left of West Pakistan. We still have to do it. We need to get our act together. You are a big boy. Please realize that. Realize your potential. And then act like a big boy. We don't have to go sucking up to the United States or Russia or China or whosoever. India, when it gets its act together, is an elephant. It may rise slowly, but once an elephant starts moving, Rajiv, that momentum of a heavyweight animal is quite relentless and unstoppable.
Very good, General Bakshi. With that positive note and a stirring call to action, let's conclude this. It's been a real delight and a real pleasure, and we'll continue having these conversations very regularly. I want to thank General Bakshi and remind my viewers, please go to the Infinity Foundation website, get involved. There are various calls to action to keep this series going and all our research going. We need your participation and resources, so do show that you are behind us. And we are going to continue this series of discussions with thought leaders. And General Bakshi, you're a great thought leader. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Rajiv.
To help me, you can do two things. You can go to the subscribe button on my YouTube and subscribe. We need more subscribers there. Secondly, I get lots of emails on people saying, how do we donate? How can we help you? You go to rajivmalhotra.com or you go to infinityfoundation.com and you can hit the donate button. You can donate in dollars. There are different ways mentioned. If you want to donate in rupees, there is a column called Infinity Foundation India, and you click that and there are instructions on how you can donate in India.